Hey everyone, it's Emily Fox. Today's video is going to be the continuation of this series where I attempt to find my all-time favorite books. In the last couple of years, I started doing this video where I try to find my #1 best book of each year through a tournament bracket. It's a lot of fun, but I thought it was sad that I didn't have this information for my first couple of years on Booktube, so we're going back and we're correcting that. So I've already done 2016 and 17, so today we're going to go back to 2018, and I will be reviewing all of the books that I read that year, choosing a best book for each month, and then finding my ultimate best book of that year. This is going to be a long one because I read 102 books in 2018, so let's get to work. So in January of 2018, I finished 6 books, so that one's going to be a quick one. The first one was the last Harry Potter book. We're moving on. And then I finished Is Dark Materials, which I had been meaning to reread this book as an adult for a while because I loved this as a child. I don't think this is specifically a children's book. I feel like a lot of it went way above my head as I found out while rereading it, and I still would highly recommend this series in general. You are following a young girl that is part of a world, a fantasy world, where people have half of their souls is a demon. It's like an animal shape and they can't really go far from them. So there are those elements in there, and she ends up going on a huge adventure. We're going to keep that vague. When it came out, it was super controversial because religious people were saying that this was against God, but the author was sending a message that was more like against organized religion. So that did not go super well with some people, but I really enjoyed that series. Again, even as an adult. So this was fantastic, 5-star, and I feel like if I were to read it again, I would still give it 5-star. Then I finished Sapien, which is a nonfiction that was quite popular at the time. I overall enjoyed it. Once again, at the time, I don't know how I would feel about it nowadays. Due to reading more from the author, it wasn't as good, to be fair. Then I read The Sky is Everywhere, which this is a contemporary YA book. I don't read a ton of these anymore. I used to. If you compare year to year, you can definitely see a progress in my reading, especially where I would get my recommendations. So I feel like I read less and less of that specific genre. They were so popular, but usually didn't really work for me. But this one did. This was my second book by the author, to be fair. And I had really enjoyed I'll Give You the Sun by her. This one is about grief, and it was very emotional. So if you like YA contemporaries, this was good. Then I read a book that I forgot completely. Dusk or Dark or Dawn or Day. Could not tell you anything about this book. And then lastly that month, I finished The Lost Child of Lynchford, which is a really short book that you're following witches in a small town. This is the second book in that series, and I gave up on it after that because it just was not appealing to me. So to no one's surprise, the best book that I read that month was Is Dark Materials, of course. In February of 2018, I also finished 6 books. The first one being All Are Wrong Todays, which is about alternate universe from what I remember. And at the time, I felt like some of the sections were a little sexist. I feel like I would probably be harsher on it at the time, but I liked it for what it was. Then I read Six of Crows, which was all the rage. It still is. I feel like I enjoyed how in the TV show they combined the Grisha series to this series. I did like it overall, but at the time it was really controversial when I said this. I feel like maybe less now. I felt like I liked the characters a lot more than the actual story. Like the heist was fine. It felt too easy. I feel like in general, Kaz, the main character, is like being smarter than everyone. It feels easy at times, but I did still overall like it because of the characters. So I get it, but at the same time, I feel like it's almost overhyped. Then I read Theft of Swords, which was another adult fantasy series, which I say adults because some of them I feel like they probably would be categorized as YA if they were written by women. And that is one of those because I remember one of the scenes really early on that felt very like edgy in the humor of like people trying to steal from them, and then just with his words he's just like fighting them. I think I wasn't really the target audience. I never really continued this series. It just wasn't for me. No hard feelings. It was fine. Although looking back, I feel like I was a bit annoyed by the female characters. There's like one more complex one, and the rest were all like sex workers. So next, I finished this whole trilogy. I'm just going to talk all about it right now, even though the third book I read next month. But The Last Policeman is the first book in this adult sci-fi series. It's like an apocalyptic story, which I feel like the premise is better than the actual execution that tends to happen, but sometimes it's still worth reading. I don't feel like you always have to give a book 5 stars to get something out of it, but in this one, it's a version of a world where there's an asteroid coming. I think it's like in a year or something, and like there's nothing we can do, so you're just following humanity through that last year and a half, and you're following a character who is a policeman trying to solve a murder mystery, and you're following him through those last few months as he's trying to piece things together, and the world is slowly ending, or is about to end, I guess, but you know, chaos is obviously happening because people know what's coming. And yeah, I found that the premise was really intriguing. The execution was okay. Nevermore. I feel like this is super popular. I think this is a middle grade fantasy series. I've only read the first one because I've realized middle grade doesn't really work for me. I was told that this was like magical school, but book one, there's no magical school. There's a talking cat, a giant cat, right? That's what I remember. And I thought it was just okay. No hard feelings. I just don't feel like I was the target audience. So in February, quite easily, my best book has to be Six of Crows, because again, even though I did find some weaknesses, I completely understand why people got emotionally attached to the characters. In March, I somehow finished 16 books. Emily, old Emily, or younger Emily, teach me your ways. Like, how did you read so many books? So the first one is the third book in that series, so we're just going to move on. The Sudden Appearance of Hope, which this was my second book by the author. I do feel like she writes literary fiction sci-fi, which is not super common. So her writing style is a bit heavy for me, but this one had an interesting premise, which I'm now realizing is really similar to The Invisible Life of Hetty Larue. But you have hope, and people forget when she leaves the room, forget her. Am I misremembering? Because that is very similar. I'm purposely not preparing for these videos so you can have my live reaction, because if I overthink, I might choose different answers, and I wanted to see if I would remember the premise of these books from the top of my head. Yeah, people forget her. So if you like that premise, that's another one. This one is a bit more literary fiction, like I was saying, so you have that option. Then I read Animal Farm because I was still trying to read a lot of those classic, modern classics that are quite popular that I didn't have to read in school. And this one I did like. I feel like they tend to be a bit hit and miss, but this one I did enjoy. Would I have benefited from having the introspection of a class? Probably, but I still got quite a bit out of it and understand the hype. Then I read Parasite, and I barely remember it. It's the same author from actually the next book. Shannon Maguire and Mira Grant are the same person. This was a sci-fi. Is it considered YA or adult? I was on a big kick for like apocalyptic stories, so I read that one, didn't really stick with me. Beneath the Sugar Sky, again, Shannon Maguire, same author. This is the third book in this series with We Were Children that go to different universes like Narnia, and they come back and they struggle to readapt. So book one was the beginning, kind of giving you more info about this. Book two was one of those universes, and book three is a different universe. Everyone will have a favorite universe to explore. Personally, book four is my favorite one. So book three was fine. Just fine. Then I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and this was an all-time favorite that I raved about nonstop since. Would I feel the same nowadays? I don't know. Some of you did want me to reread some of those that I don't know how I feel, or like my all-time best, which I don't know if the best one of each year is something I would reread now, but I do want to re-explore some of the ones that I feel like I've recommended a ton, and I'm curious to see if I would feel 100% the same nowadays, because I know there are some more weaknesses in here. Like I've mentioned that even though this was a 5-star, where I rounded it up to 5-star, the ending is by far the weakest portion of the book, but I still felt like it was worth it because that premise is so unique. It is a murder mystery with some sci-fi elements. So for example, the main character wakes up every day in a different body, and they have to figure out what happened to Evelyn Hardcastle because she dies every night. So they're stuck in that loop, and it was really interesting. So I did really love it at a time, and I feel like it might be my best book of that month, but we'll see again. 16 books. I did read Warcross, and I hated it because a lot of things I found a little stupid. It is why sci-fi main character has rainbow hair, which it's so common for these YA books to have like rainbow or like crazy colored hair or eyes. It's just so typical of those books. And like sometimes it works, but that one made me cringe because of the romance, and I hated everything about the story, frankly. Like she was a hacker, but her technique was to just like unfocus her eyes and things would pop to her. and how the romance is basically with this dude that she had a crush on, like, this rich famous dude, and why would he have a crush on her? Like, why? Anyway, I hated it, clearly. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Okay, I don't support this author anymore, but this was the first of the 3 books I've read by her, and this was my favorite one. The main character is in her 80s, and for the first time, she's retelling her life story, and she's doing it through her 7 husbands. I did find the flashbacks really good. I didn't care for the current time portion and the ending, but at the time, I gave it 5 star. Swan Song. Okay, I was reading a ton of post-apocalyptic books, a lot of the really popular ones, and this was one of the ones that you see on every list of must-read post-apocalyptic books. I have since realized that they don't work as well for me as some of the other ones I've done. I've done recommendation videos, and the first one I did all the popular ones and then stopped reading that genre for a little while because they weren't working, and then I found a bunch of 5-star ones. But I found that a lot of the ones that are written by men tend to be really sexually violent, and I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. And this one of the things I resented was the fact that it is a post-apocalyptic book, like nuclear war one, but I don't like when suddenly magical elements appear. It's very realistic, and then you add the fantasy, and I'm like, oh, that's not what I expected. So it was okay. Definitely not the worst one I've read. The Woman in the Window is another one that at the time was okay, but I really started resenting authors relying on female character being an alcoholic to make them unreliable. I think this one was one of the ones that I really started resenting it. So I know it was made into a movie. I didn't bother. I felt like this book made me want to drink. I don't even drink. It was a lot. It was a lot. Then I read Bad Feminist, which is a short story collection, no, an essay collection by Roxane Gay. And I do remember liking it. I don't remember a ton out of it. I mean, there are a few things I do remember. Definitely trigger warning. The Humans by Matt Haig. Oh my gosh, this is my favorite book by the author. Claudia, if you touch that mirror, when I do that video where we read some of my all-time favorite books, but it's been a while, this would be there. This will be there because this is sci-fi, but it's a very accessible sci-fi. The premise is really interesting. You have this alien that is sent basically as punishment to Earth to eliminate the scientist that found this math equation that they don't think we're ready for. So he goes and kills him, and then he pretends to be him and has to eliminate everyone else that knows about it. And he has to try and pass as human. And he finds us interesting. Let's just go with that. So it's what it is to be human at first is unserious, and then it becomes deeper and deeper. And I remember really loving it. I've recommended that book so much, and it's a must read to me. But yeah, I'm curious to see how I feel about it nowadays. I'm sure I'm going to love it again. There is a dog, and it's not killed for shock value, which is important. So yeah, I remember really loving it. I recommend it a ton, so I want to reread it for sure. Next, we have The Forever War. I used to read a lot more classic sci-fi, and I used to try and focus about the concepts and look away from all the issues with it. I would call it a little bit of spice, which is not a good thing, and not the spicy books that people talk about nowadays. And I got so much backlash, people saying, oh, you didn't understand the book. I understood it just fine. It just sucked because I hate whenever authors write books that are futuristic and add a of misogyny, sexism, racism. Why? I know that this was written the author, blah, 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 Vietnam War, blah, blah, blah. I don't care. You cannot justify it. You know what? Let me get some quotes for you, okay? I wanted to read it because it is a war in space, first contact with aliens that plays with, is it time relativity? Basically, he spends a year in space, but 50 years happen on Earth, that kind of thing. So the character will have issues adapting back on Earth. I understand that. But I still feel let me read you 2 quotes, okay? The first one is the one that people would try to justify, which fine, but I'd gotten used to open female homosex in the months since we'd left Earth. Even stopped resenting the loss of potential partners. The men together still gave me a chill, though. That one, you can try to play it up at the author, the character not, getting used to how the world advanced. Fine, maybe. But the other one, you can't do it. For context, they just arrived to a new space station. They're part of the army once again. Then unleashed Stargate's 18 smecks starved men on our women, compliant and promiscuous by military custom and law, but desiring nothing so much as sleep. So you're telling me that this author decided that yes, in the future women will be in the army, but they will be there to get freaking raped. And I'm saying graped, by the way, because YouTube is a poo-poo head and I don't want the video to get flagged and I want to be able to talk about this. I use the real words in real life, but like you cannot tell me like why? Anyway, moving on. I hated that book, clearly. Behind Closed Doors is a mystery with DV, and I didn't really care with the way it was portrayed, but it seemed to be an unpopular opinion at the time, but I don't remember enough to really tell you more than this. The Magicians, this was perceived as an adult, depressed version of Harry Potter, and I liked it okay if you like insufferable characters. But the ending was kind of weak in my opinion. And then finally, I read Good Behavior by Blake Crouch. I had read a couple of his books, but was looking forward to trying more, and this one I did not care for. It's basically short stories, but it feels like a skeleton of a story. I don't know if this was written for the purpose of becoming a show. I think it did, but I didn't care for it. I was disappointed. So out of the 16, it has to be between The Humans and The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, so I think I'm going to give it to The Humans. This was good. I would still recommend it a ton. In April, I finished 13 books. The first one was 6 Weeks, and this is one of those books that the concept is more interesting than the book, but I still think it's absolutely worth it because a book doesn't need to have 5-star. You don't need to give it 5-star to enjoy it. So this one is like a murder mystery, closed room murder mystery. In this future version of our world, people have different clone bodies. So for example, the last time you save your memory, you can put that in your new body if something happens to you. And you're following a crew on a spaceship and they wake up and they're all in new bodies. Their old bodies are all dead. So someone did it and it has to be one of them. So they're trying to figure out what happened and it has to be one of them. So I thought this was really interesting and the writing was okay. The story overall was okay, but I thought the concept was really fun. So would recommend it still because of that. Then I read Solaris, which is another classic sci-fi. This one, I feel like, again, the idea was more interesting in theory than the actual story. It's a first contact with aliens where the alien is an ocean on the planet. So you get paragraphs and paragraphs of just waves and the description of waves. So yeah, it wasn't the most compelling story. Let's just go with that. Then I read Children of Blood and Bone, which is a YA fantasy series. I've only read the first book. It was quite popular, and you know how it is. Like they get really popular and everyone starts bashing them. I thought at the time that it was worth the hype. I don't remember pretty much anything. I think my main issue with it was some of the characters, the relationship between the characters, but like it's YA, so I feel like it's more common for me to have these issues, but if you like them and you wanted to try something different, it wasn't another like medieval inspired one. The Sixth Extinction. Oh my gosh, it's been 6 years. Okay, let's talk about that one. This is a nonfiction. I have been meaning to read more about climate change. This is definitely terrifying as a topic. I've read some good ones. We'll see them probably later. But this one was a flop for me. And again, I got so much backlash on Goodreads, but I don't care. I stand by what I said. First off, the topic was a lot more interesting than the actual book. I was joking, that was my mistake. I joked that for the first hour and a half of the audiobook, you will learn everything that you could ever want to know about rainforest frogs, which frogs are chill, they're fine, but it was not quite what I expected. Plus, it's the kind of nonfiction that you're following the author while they're traveling, getting all these answers for the topic of the book. And you have to at least tolerate the author, which I couldn't do. A few times she made comments that made me like side-eye her. Like, I don't know her name. I don't remember her name. I don't know what she looks like, but I can't stand her. And she, at one point, that story, 6 years later, that story is still in my head. She goes to this like museum or something, and she goes to the gift shop and asks the person there to give her a tour. And the person is like, I can't do that, no. And she's pissed about it. She put it in her book. And I'm like, you do not realize how I'm perceiving you right now. How the editor left that in there, I don't know. But it made me just realize that I was feeling that. Like I could already feel that before, and that made me feel really justified in the fact that I couldn't stand her. So yeah, that's basically what I remember about the book, the rainforest frog and her bee. Next, I finished The Andromeda Strain, which this book is, again, first contact with alien. It's a trope I really love. If you have more recommendation, I went and read so many of them. But this one is a bit different. It reads like an action movie, if that's your thing. Although, do be warned, this is the driest writing literally ever. But I really, really enjoyed it, so I looked past it. So then I read The Psychopath Test, which this one is almost the opposite. I felt like the execution of the book was just okay, but the author came off as really likable, like in a really socially awkward way. I would recommend the audiobook in general. Whenever he narrates them, they're great. So the book was okay, but I liked him more than I liked Six, extinction. When breath becomes air, this is a really popular nonfiction book where the author is a doctor and he is diagnosed with a terminal disease, and you're following him going through those treatments, which it is really interesting to see it from the perspective of a doctor. I did have some opinions. It's really hard to make some judgments about someone's life to begin with, especially whenever they write a book because they're dying. But I'm curious to know how people feel about people deciding to have a kid whenever they know they're about to die. How do you feel about it? I'm curious. But mainly, my main thing about the book is that I thought the ending, the epilogue, was by far the best part of the book, and it's written by his wife. I feel like she's a much better writer. Again, there's no way for me to talk about this without sounding like a... That's the portion that I got emotional. I feel like she was really fantastic at writing that part, so it's really popular. It's definitely worth checking out. Then I read Children of Time. I still recommend this book a ton. Another first contact with aliens. It's basically human versus giant intelligent spiders. It's a must read. You kind of flip-flop between the chapters between the remnant of humanity and those spiders. So I now call every spider I can find Portia. I can't stop, won't stop. We finally did it. Finally found a book that I don't remember reading. The New Neighbors. Listen, if I hadn't seen it right now on that list and you had shown me that book, no, it's the first time. Although we have noticed a pattern of like mystery thrillers not sticking as much, which I feel like it's pretty normal. I feel like the stories don't tend to. Maybe it's just me, but I don't remember reading this, so that's not a good sign. The Diviners. This is a urban fantasy. I don't read a ton of those, and it is also why I did listen to that one as an audiobook, which I think was the right way of doing it. It's kind of paranormal vibes, and I really enjoyed it as an audiobook, like a lot more than I expected. I feel like the expressions that they were using are definitely the ones that were stuck in my head still nowadays. Like, that's the cat's meow. I liked it at the time. Could not tell you much about the story nowadays, but at least I remember enjoying it. Men's Search for Meaning is a nonfiction about this theory the author created in his head, or figured out while he was surviving the concentration camps. Basically, he believes that what made a difference between the people that made it or not, obviously not everyone, was the people that had a why, like a reason for living. So that's really interesting. It's quite short, like 100 pages. So it's definitely something that you see a lot also on like must-read lists. So I would agree. Then you have Altered Carbon. To be honest, I did not finish this book. I hated it once again. This felt like it was a bad corn written by like a very corny teenage boy. Listen, I think I put it down the 100-something pages into it. You have this version of a world where people can have different sleeves, like a different body, and there's this man that is transferred into this body, and he's pumped full with hormones, and it shows. He is sent to investigate a murder. Basically, this rich man died, but he's fine because, again, they just put his mind into a new sleeve, so it's fine. And he goes to interrogate his wife. And in 3 pages, you're told twice that he's staring at her chest, and you're told twice that his eggplant is getting hard. Twice in 3 pages each. So I was already not a big fan. Like, she's literally like, her husband was killed. Like, he's fine, but like, still. And then you're told, I think he goes back to his hotel, and you're told that he's like half-ass touching himself. And then I put it down whenever there was the schmeck scene that was questionable in terms of like consent. I just realized that I was not the target audience. To be honest, at this point, like 2024, I'm very, very sick of those dark world, often written by men, that are dark just because of schmexual violence. It's always their go-to, like, oh no, the female character is going through something and it's going to advance the male story. Like, it's always... Anyway, I don't know if that's exactly what happens in there. I know it's a dark world and I've heard things, but I didn't finish it because I couldn't stand it. So the fact that I'm still this mad 6 years later, it's because I've had to justify that opinion so many times. That's why I'm like... And then last but not least, that month, I finished Circe, which I loved. I would highly recommend Madeline Miller as an author in general. I think audiobooks are definitely the way to go if you enjoy them, because her writing is just so beautiful, and it's obviously a retelling of Circe. So if you like witchy mythology, you need to read it. So the best one I have to choose, it could be Circe, but I think I'm gonna have to go with Children of Time because I've recommended that one so much. I feel like I might remember it more positively than like while reading it. I did find that some sections were a little slower, but it's just such a must. And like the ending took me by surprise. I really loved it. So in May, I finished 19 books. Emily, how the heck did you do this? To be fair, I'm seeing some of them are on the shorter side, but like 19, I think that's the most I've ever done though. So yeah, it is the most I've ever done. But like, it's like when I see people reading 300 books a year, how? That's my version of that, clearly. So the first one I finished was Stories of Your Life and Others, which is a short story collection that I loved. They tend to be more hit and miss, but this one is fantastic. It's a mix of sci-fi and fantasy in general. I remember, is it the first one they're going up that tower or building it? But it's the short story collection that, well, one of them became the movie The Arrival, which is like a must. First contact with alien sci-fi. So I would recommend it. There are a few differences compared to the movie. Hollywood always changes things to make things more dramatic. Like, to be vague, like the daughter is much older in the story. So anyway, I did obviously like it. The Power is a dystopian version of a world where women start developing these like power where they can like shock people. So obviously it changes everything with the patriarchy. There's a lot of, I was going to say drama. That is not the right word. While this book was not perfect, I did appreciate that the author didn't go with like, oh, it's now becoming a utopia. Like, obviously things are gonna be hectic. So this was interesting. I remember liking it. Dear Jawili, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. This is a letter the author wrote for her friend's daughter. And actually, I remember there's a good quote in there. Let me grab it. That's like the main thing I remember about it, but I want to do it justice. Teach her that if you criticize X in women, but do not criticize X in men, you do not have a problem with X, you have a problem with women. So that was a good one. Release by Patrick Ness did not really stick with me. You go back and forth between two point of view, and I don't think it was his best one. Thunderhead, I mentioned in the last video, this series, I did overall enjoy it. Book 2 is still good. It starts by being a utopia, and you realize it's probably more a dystopian world, so a lot of political intrigue in the second book. The Death of Mrs. Westaway, this is a modern gothic book. I did remember liking it. The story per se didn't really stick with me, but definitely gothic vibes if that's your thing. Strange the Dreamer. I was still trying some YA books, as you can see, and this one was getting quite a bit of hype. And I liked the first half. It's a YA fantasy. Did I say that? But I didn't care for the second half. It becomes very like insta-love, and it felt like a completely different book. So meh, never continued the series. Run, another Blake Crouch book that I found disappointing. I think people tend to have a very extreme reaction to it. It's a dystopian version of a world where one day people see something in the sky at night, and people that saw it, they go crazy and just go and murder people. And the other ones are trying to, you know, survive. So you're following this family of 4 who try and escape to make it to Canada, because apparently here we didn't see it. And I found the children absolutely Actually, I did a video where I talked about a bunch of books that made me want to not have children. It's a very lighthearted video. If you want to see it, I would recommend it. And that video included this book because the children were so annoying. But I had mostly issues with the ending, which I can spoil in the comment section. It's just a big pet peeve of mine, but you might feel differently. I'm not selling that, huh? The Glass Castle is a nonfiction memoir that frankly did not stick with me, but I only gave it 2 stars when everyone else seems to love it, so I'm not sure why. I would have to reread it. I didn't leave a review, so I have no idea. Like Davy, like family, anyway, I didn't love it. The Oracle Year also did not really stick with me. It's sci-fi-esque where like there's a list of future prediction, and again, I don't remember much. Long Way Down, I did remember enjoying this one. This is a YA one too. I think this one would be really good to read like in high school. You follow main character, he finds out, I think it's a family member was shot, and he's, you know, trying to go and get his revenge. And as he gets into the elevator, at each level, he meets like a ghost. And by the time that he gets to the bottom, he has changed his mind. It's about the cycle of violence, basically, and this was great. So would recommend that one. Not That Bad, which is a short story collection or essays about grape culture. This was definitely very triggering. Would look into it if that's something that could be an issue for you, but I remember it being very impactful. It's enraging, obviously, but still very relevant for sure. Contact is an adult sci-fi. This one you're following vegans aliens. And I did really enjoy it. It's definitely heavy on the science, definitely on a drier side. I ended up watching the movie right after to compare, and obviously Hollywood added a very needless romance, but I do recommend the book if you like heavier sci-fi books. I guess First Contact with Aliens again. Sometimes I lie. Okay, this one I have mixed feelings about because yes, it will be shocking because the author puts like 50 twists in the book. Like, you know how it is. Like, of course I'm going to be surprised at one point when you add like 10 twists in a row. Like, of course I can't see that one coming. But I don't really love, I think the character starts by saying like 3 possible things, but she says that she can lie. She just came out of a coma, and like it wasn't a little too much for me, but it's really popular, so you might feel differently. But this was the only book I read by the author because I just didn't really care for it. Pretty Girls. Oh my gosh. Okay, I don't get triggered very often by books, but I find this author, this was going to be my only book by her. Okay, this is like a mystery thriller, whatever. Karen Slaughter is super popular, but I cannot stand her books. Like I said, I've read Accidentally a Second One, but I find that they tend to be too schmexually violent. They tend to be like in a gratuitous way. I would have to reread it to be able to pinpoint exactly my issues, but like I will never read anything else by her. Pretty Girls was not for me. I'm not the right person for it. Sharp Objects. Gillian Flynn. The special place you have in my heart. I feel like this one I didn't give it 5-star, but there's just something about her that writes morally gray female characters. She does it so well. I watched a TV show, which I think is better, but either way, you have to go through this book at one point. Like, it's a must, or watch the TV show. You have this female character who went through a lot. You can tell that she has some trauma. Definitely a bunch of trigger warnings also for this book. And she has to go back to her small town as a journalist to investigate a string of young girls disappearing. And she has a very complicated relationship with her mother and just everyone there, really. And yeah, it was good, but dark. The Stars of Legion is one of the weirdest books I tried to read. Let's just say with that, adult sci-fi, it was not for me. Red Clocks, I don't remember anything about this one. Like, in a bad way. Like, I didn't care for it. Speak is a YA contemporary that talks about grape. That's basically what I remember. This would be another one that would be good to read in high school. I feel like that month was really all over the place, as you can see, in terms of my enjoyment. Obviously, I feel like nowadays I'm a bit harsher because looking back, I know what a 5-star is, right? So I feel like most of the books you'll read will end up being 3 or 4-star. Like, it's not a bad thing. But if I had to choose the best one from a 2024 lens, I think I'm going to give it to Long Way Down. I don't know if that would have been my answer at the time, but I feel like that's the one that I nowadays would recommend the most. I was not expecting that, but it deserves it. June, I finished 11 books. The Wife Between Us, I don't remember. I just remember that this was one of my first signs that domestic thrillers are not for me. I don't care about cheating husbands, so... Only Humans, I addressed that in my last video because I had read book 1 and 2. This is book 3 in this adult sci-fi series. The series started really good for me, and this one, the author included too many like political current event at the time, and it just went on huge tangents. It was a disappointment. Leah on the Offbeat, this is book 2 after Simon and versus the Homo sapien agenda, which I remember liking fine at the time, didn't really stick with me. Again, I don't really read YA contemporary books. The Cruel Prince, I hated that one. I was finally starting to realize that YA in general wasn't working for me. This is YA fantasy. It's the first book in a series that is so incredibly popular, and I don't understand why. They're very readable, I'll give it that, but I'm not a big fan of like fairies in general, those stories. I hated the romance. Like, why are they always going for really insufferable male characters? Like, I don't get it. I know people like morally gray. There's no gray there. He's a doo-doo head. I don't want to get flagged. Rendezvous with Rama. This is another classic sci-fi. This one didn't feel, I don't remember it being as like problematic as the other ones. It's also First Contact with Aliens. There is this spaceship that is caught going into our solar system. So there's a team that is sent to investigate, and you're following them as they go through the spaceship. It was good. It was overall good. All Systems Red. Oh, I think this might be my best one. I haven't seen what's left, but oh, this is the first book in the Murderbot series. It's like 100-something pages. I have read like 4 or 5 books in that series, and this is by far my favorite one. I feel like it started really strong. You're following Murderbot that is like half robot, and they can't stand humans, but they have to work for them, and they would rather just watch TV shows. It was a vibe. It was a vibe. I did enjoy book 1 quite a bit. Legion is a almost short story collection by Brent Sanderson. It's like short stories, and it's like 3, I think, in total. You have this man that has like, I don't know if you would call it like multiple personalities. Like, basically, if he reads a book on a certain topic, a different person in his head that only him can see will like appear and knows everything about that topic. Like, if I read like a Spanish dictionary, someone that speaks Spanish would appear. They have their own personality and everything, and they can have access to that knowledge through that. I'm not sure that I'm explaining that right, but it was a really interesting idea, and I kept being a little frustrated because they were so short, and I wanted more. The Immortalist is another book that I thought the summary sounded more interesting than these siblings meet this woman who foretells whatever, the day that they will die, and she tells them. And obviously it affects the rest of her life. I think this was a bit more like literary fiction, historical fiction than I personally enjoy, but I think it's worth checking out if that sounds appealing to you. I think it's historical fiction, which I don't read a ton of. Then I read Emma by Jane Austen. I ended up liking this a lot more than I expected. I loved Pride and Prejudice, but that was the only book I had read by her. And I had not watched any like movie, TV show version. There's no TV show. Any movie version of this story. And I ended up really liking it. Emma is quite something, but I still enjoyed the romance in this one. I've read basically everything by her at this point, and this is my second favorite just after Pride and Prejudice. So this was a 5-star. Death by Black Hole, I don't remember anything. I used to try and read a lot of really science-heavy nonfictions, and I feel like they didn't really stick that much with me. And then I read The Outsider by Stephen King, which I remember liking. Can you hear Claudia? Jeez. But for my review, I was saying how it started good and then kind of lost interest a little bit, although it is linked to his other series, the Bill Hodges one, which was interesting. I did really like that one. But there are spoilers, so you have to start with that first. Let me open the door. Come see. Hi. I can't give you kisses. I'm wearing lipstick and lip gloss. Hey. I'm sorry, can't give you kisses. There you go. So if you hear screams, it's Claudia, obviously. She is very vocal. She hates closed doors. Go and destroy everything. Let's go. Go decorate. So the best book that month will have to go to Emma. I wasn't expecting a classic to make it there, but it was better than All System Red, which was my second favorite. In July, I finished 10 books. The Puppy War, dare I need to say anything. Adult fantasy series, morally great female character, magic system is interesting. I loved it. I loved it. It's obviously also very intense. It is a war, but loved it. To All the Boys I've Loved Before and P.S. I Still Love You. This is another YA contemporary series romance. I liked book 1. I thought it was cute. Book 2 made me realize that this was not supposed to be a trilogy. You know how sometimes they feel stretched? Book 2 felt really pointless to the point I didn't end up picking up book 3. So it could have been a duology, I feel like. All the Beautiful Lies is my least favorite book by Peter Swanson. I did not finish it because I hated it. There were 2 instances of, was it incest? Like, it was shockingly bad. I think it's his least popular book to begin with, so I'm definitely not alone. I put it down at 60%. So I had issues with the relationships and the pacing, and I was tired of, it felt like shocking value to include those weird relationships, and I was tired of, alcoholic, unreliable wife, so. Artificial Condition was book 2 in the Murderbot series. It was fine. I felt like I didn't care about the storyline, just like the character. Beauty Queens was another. I don't need to talk about this. Jurassic Park. I liked it more than I expected. I had seen the movie as a kid. I was traumatized by the toilet scene or the scene. And I was curious to see how it would feel about the book, and I really enjoyed it. A lot more science than expected, but in a good way. So. And I tried to read Aragon because everyone was raving about this YA fantasy series. And yes, I know it was written when he was a child, and it shows. It sucks, okay? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think this is one of those books that I think that the jokes and the context and everything are more interesting than the amount of enjoyment I got from reading it, which is super unpopular, but it was fine. It was just fine. I don't get why it's so beloved. And Lady Susan is a very short novella by Jane Austen once again. It was made into a movie, which I think was better. It's actually quite funny, especially the movie. People don't really understand how Jane Austen is really funny, so this was good. So the best one, obviously, is going to be The Puppy War. Obviously, no competition here. In July, I only finished 3 books. You'll see why one of them is pretty thick. The first one was The Secret Life of Bees, which at the time I didn't really have as full of an understanding as I do now. And I still feel like, because English is my second language, sometimes I just lack the vocabulary for it. But I basically following this young white girl who I think she runs away from home or something, and it's set in the 60s in South Carolina, and she ends up living with these black women who are making honey. And it's like a coming of age story through her eyes, but you're watching black people through the girl's little white girl storyline. And I understand the criticism I have seen. And quite frankly, I found her story a lot more boring than the other women. They look way more interesting, or what we got was a lot more interesting. And I understand the criticism because of that. So again, I'm not sure how I would feel about it nowadays. I feel like I would have to reread it to have a more complex review here, but I kind of feel so-so about that one. Then I read The Storied Life of A.G. Fikri, which is another one of those stories with like he's not actually old, but like man that is grumpy, that has lost his wife, who ends up stuck taking care of a young girl, basically a toddler that is left in his used bookstores, if you like small town bookstores. And it opens him up to life, blah, blah, blah. So I remember really enjoying it at the time. And then last but not least, that's what took me the whole month. I read part 1 of The Count of Monte Cristo. I read it in French, and it's in 2 books. They're both like 700 plus pages. This book, I have mixed feelings a little bit about this one, but let's stick to part 1. The first 400 pages of this book are the easiest 5-star ever. It's just so interesting. People are always saying, epic revenge story. Definitely the main character is tricked by his friend, and he ends up in prison, and his friend ends up marrying the woman he was supposed to marry. And then in prison, a lot happens. And whenever, he will try and escape and get his revenge kind of story. And yes. So it will be my best book of that month. In September, I finished 7 books. The first one was I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is a very strange book, but I didn't really love it. I know it was made into, I think, a movie. It didn't really stick with me. But horror tends to be hit and miss, and I feel like some of the things were kind of predictable, but then some things were placed there to make you... Anyway, it was okay. The Radium Girls. I'm still traumatized. Nonfiction, so obviously it's a true story, and it's based on these women who would paint with radium paint, and it's a mix of so many things. It's like history, it's feminism, it's like workers' right, but they would paint with these tiny brushes, and to get them very pointy, they would put them in their mouth. And now we know, radium, right? So they would paint like watches, glow in the dark, which I would have fell for that for sure. I like glow in the dark everything. And yeah, it was absolutely horrifying. So must read. This author in general I love, but yeah, must read. Red Sister, I don't support Mark Lawrence anymore, but I really enjoy that one. It's an adult fantasy series, and I thought it was refreshing how the female characters were actually not skinny little pretty things, you're following badass fighting nuns. So let me review the whole trilogy in one go. I enjoyed the series, but then my interest went down. The last book was too short and kind of disappointing ending. Then I read Harry Potter stuff. Born a Crime. I remember enjoying this one as an audiobook. Would recommend it that way because the author narrates it. He's quite charismatic, and it's the story of how he was born mixed race, and it was a crime. And it's based about mostly his relationship with his mother. I forgot to mention this quote. This is definitely one of my favorite part of the book. I would recommend pausing to read it. So that was good. Then I read The Fifth Season, N.K. Jemisin. Yes. This is a really interesting adult fantasy apocalyptic kind of setting. The world is ending for the 5th time, basically. Climate change. Their version of that, the magic system was really interesting. It was quite complex though because the writing style, some chapters were written at the second person, so like you, it gets confusing, but it's a revenge story. I feel like not enough people talk about that part. The main character, she has magical powers you're not supposed to, and you can be, well, killed or taken away to go to, I call it the forced magical school, not really, but it's complicated to explain. And she has 2 kids with this man that doesn't know. And then one day when she's out of the house, their youngest, their son, uses magic, so her husband kills him, and then he runs away with the daughter. So she wants to go and find him, get her revenge, get her daughter back. And there's just a lot, and it's great. It's great. And then All the Missing Girls. That was a good month. Megan Miranda, this was my first book by her. She tends to write murder mystery, small town. This one, the way it's written is really interesting because you have the beginning and then you go back, is it 14 days after? And then you go back in time to figure out what happened. So it was cool. So if I had to choose a favorite, I think I'm going to give it to The Fifth Season. It deserves the hype. In October, I finished 4 books. The first one was City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. This is a middle grade book, which again, I realized I don't read middle grades. It wasn't for me. The Good Daughter. Okay, this is where I was tricked into reading another Karen Slaughter. I just saw an audiobook at the library that was available right now that had good ratings, and I didn't realize it was the same author, and I found it equally awful. Again, a lot of schmexual violence towards female characters that I found kind of needless. So I feel like her books, you either love them or you hate them, and they're just really not for me. Then I read The Alloy of Law, which is the first book in the second Ms. Bourne series, which this one is more like Western. And it's really interesting to see how the magical system is going to be affected by pew-pews. It is more like lighter, funnier, murder mystery detective kind of vibes, which I'm not as emotionally invested as the first series. I have, at this point, only the 4th one left, but his endings are still good. The characters are likable. The humor is fine. It's just I'm not as invested, but I want to read the whole thing so I can continue because it's going to get more and more complex, more and more interesting. And then you have the second book in the Legion series, which was also fine. So I think I'm going to have to give it to Brandon Sanderson just because there's nothing else. I did enjoy it. Like, I'm being needlessly harsh. It's probably like a 4-star. It's just that Ms. Bourne is so like, oh my god. So the second series is, in comparison, just okay. In November, I finished 3 books. First off was The Stand. This is such a thick book. I have mixed feelings about Stephen King. Again, like looking back, it's so much easier to critique him because I've read so many of his books. And in general, his endings suck. No different here. I also found that this one, I think this one was written in the 80s. I have issues with the way like sexuality, female characters are written, described. Like this whole like, again, fantasy-ish elements of like, oh, saving my virginity for evil, like whatever. And there was a lot of walking. I read the unabridged version, which probably plays into this whole thing, but yeah, it was okay. Like the beginning is so strong. The way that like this disease starts affecting everyone, this might be a lot for people because of the pandemic, but it was really interesting to see the spread of it. And then my interest kind of went up and down through the rest of the book. The Theory of Everything, nonfiction, sciencey one, did not really stick with me. The Obelisk Gate, which is book 2 by N.K. Jemisin. Yes, I think I'm going to give it to this one because I don't remember which book was my favorite in the trilogy, but the whole series was good, so whatever. I remember liking it. This one with the one under the ground, the people, right? I think so. No spoilers. And then last but not least, we have December of 2018, where I finished 4 books. The first one was a short story, A Short History of Nearly Everything, which once again didn't stick that much with me, but I remember enjoying it. Nonfiction. Then I tried to read Throne of Glass, which I've mentioned in the last video. I'm done with Sarah J. Maas in general, like even before she was problematic or I found out. This, I don't understand the hype, okay? I attempted to read book 2. I didn't finish it, so I don't think it's going to be in a future video, but let me just tell you, I don't like these YA fantasy books with the whole, I think she has special eye color. Does she have hair color too? Again, those classic things. She's stronger than everyone, but she's petite, petite, petite. And you have this competition to be the assassin, and she is so bad at this. Like, you're told that she's like the best assassin in the world. And like, I'm just going to say one of the story. It's not a spoiler. She one day goes back, like people are trying to kill her, and she goes back to her room and she finds this candy, chocolate, whatever in her bed, and she eats it. Like, you're dumb. It was so annoying. The love triangle is annoying. Like the character, there's a lot of telling and not a lot of showing, you know? She's supposed to be this strong assassin and she sucks at it. So yeah, I understand that people read it because they're very readable. A lot of really conversation more than anything, and like the love triangle, people like it. I didn't care for it, clearly. Maybe I'm too old, maybe I've read too many other books so it doesn't really compete against the other ones. I don't know. I know there's, like, she comes back every time there's a new form of social media that comes out. People start binge reading her books again, and I'm getting more and more annoyed because there's so many other books that are so much better. I know they're accessible, I know they're readable, but like, you can do better. You deserve better in your life than that. Then you have Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. I remember enjoying it. Is it like small town mystery drama? I liked it a lot, don't remember a lot. Oh my god, I finished that year, oh my god, Emily, with The Cabin at the End of the World. I thought I was going to like this. The premise, super good. The ending, super awful. The movie handled it a lot better. So if you were thinking about it, I also listened to that one as an audiobook, and it was one of the worst audiobooks I've ever listened to. The voice was so robotic and like awful. Anyway, the premise, cool. You have this family that goes in a cabin at the end of the world, and these people arrive and they start telling them that they have to do these things, otherwise the end of the world is going to happen. So throughout the book, you don't know, are they crazy? Is it really happening? And like, I like that premise. But yeah, the ending, again, I can spoil that in the comment section. It contains something, a premise, whatever, that I don't care for. But the movie, again, handled it better. I don't even know what to choose as a favorite that month because I haven't really been choosing nonfiction because I feel, unless I love it. So, do I need to choose a favorite? I guess it would be a short history of nearly everything, but I don't remember much, so it feels weird to choose it. So if I had to choose a favorite that year, that is hard. Let me put on the screen the contenders, okay? Like the strongest ones in that year. I feel like it would probably have to be 2018 Emily would probably feel differently. I'm trying to take that into consideration. But I feel like it could be The Humans by Matt Haig. That is so weird to choose because like the favorites in this video are very, very favorite. Like I really love The Puppy War. I really love the 5th season. It's Dark Materials. But like for some reason, I kind of want to choose. See, this is why I didn't want to like look at this in advance because you wouldn't get the struggle. Like that's the interesting part. Me choosing something randomly, not randomly, but like in the moment. Because I don't know what to choose. Oh my gosh. Okay, I feel like it's really in between The Puppy War and The Humans, and I feel like I would need to reread them to really know how I feel, but I'm leaning towards The Humans, which is not what I expected to choose, which again, this is why I need to not choose in advance because maybe when I'm editing I will disagree with myself. But I guess this is it, The Humans. Well, now I have no choice. I have to reread that because I need to confirm that this was a good decision. Did it age well? I mean, it's only been a few years, but like my taste has changed. Again, I'm more critical, which is a good thing. Yes, it can seem like I'm harsher and harsher in my reviews, but it's because a 5-star is so good now compared to the other ones. And like, just because you have some negative things or just things to say about a book does not mean that you didn't enjoy it. You didn't get anything out of it. But oh my God, I guess my 2018 favorites is The Humans by Matt Haig. Wow. It is my favorite by him. So, or is it? We're just going to go for it. I will probably disagree. If I had filmed it tomorrow, maybe I would have chosen something else, but that's the beauty of this. So at least you know which other ones I think are worth checking out. And like I said, I will definitely reread some of the ones that I really liked that year in a future challenge. And we'll see if I agree with myself or not. But The Humans. Oh my gosh. I hope you are enjoying this series. Definitely thumbs up, subscribe because you don't want to miss out the rest of the series. I have 3 more, I think, to post. So definitely subscribe. And I will be putting on the screen the other ones I have done. So 2016 and 2017. Definitely check those out. And I will see you next one soon. Bye. Oh my God.